All right, you're here with the Breath of Fresh Controversy podcast. My name is Zach. Would you guys introduce yourselves? We got Sarah with us today.
Yeah, hello.
And Jay.
Hello.
And then we have a special guest, Anne, on the show today.
All the way from Oshkosh Bagosh.
All the way from Oshkosh.
We flew her in.
So today's topic, we're going to be discussing the masculine spirit or masculinity in society and American culture, and some of the pros, some of the cons, and what have you. I don't know if anybody wants to start us off here, or if I should kind of.
I always can go. Whatever
Go for it.
Right,
Let's start with.
Okay, so
Jay.
I'm the older one of the bunch, so I probably see things through definitely an older lens, and I'm very curious to hear the younger voices and what's really all going on out there right now. So I am a male. Who knows? Maybe I was a female in a past lifetime, if you believe in that kind of stuff. I don't know.
You did initially start out as a female, though.
There you go. Okay. There you go.
Start out as female.
There you go. But yeah, I'm sort of anti-male to a lot of extent. But I'm a hardcore right winger, and we're in a world where everyone thinks that we're in this world now where the left wingers rip on what they call toxic masculinity. There's always been toxic masculinity, and people who are overly macho. Maybe we'll get into some of that later. The things that I see in the recent years that I just look at like, what's going on here? What is going on? And I guess I really am very much down on the rap culture, all of that has been very anti-woman, anti-fatherhood, anti-family. A lot of the rap music, when I was growing up, originally was fun. And NWA, those guys were all underground. That was all underground. And later those guys would come out and someone would go on great success. But that was more underground. That stuff got rolling in about the mid-90s. It started to come out. They were in the 80s. NWA was. Blank with attitude. I don't want to use that word on here. You guys can use that word point to. But so anyway, but there's a whole culture there that I'm shocked it's been around so long, and men being players, and you should go up and be a player, and this and that. Well, if you're impregnating a bunch of women and then you're leaving all these kids all over it, it's like whoa. So I look very much at the male with a great deal of criticism. I think we've had always, but in recent years I see so much of what I call the Peter Pan culture. Men who are chronologically men, but they're really boys. There's a maturity level that has not happened. We mentioned off mic 100 years ago. Well, my grandfather and his generation, that was the greatest generation. Now, maybe they were great because they had to be great. Oh, there's a rap song these days, but what's her name?
Lizzo.
Yeah.
But maybe they had to be. They had to be great, otherwise it wouldn't last. But I mean, that generation, the men and the women, they grew up poor with the Depression, and then they had to go fight a world war. And, my grandpa, unfortunately, saw horrible things, bodies stacked up and all kinds of things in Germany. And so, by the time he came back home, and he's 25 or whatever in his early 20s, having, then the baby boom happens. And I mean, these young guys, they'd seen a lot of the world, seen a lot of horror, they grew up hard. And by the time we're 25, 30 years old, they're men. I mean, they're men. They're mature. They know life. They know death. They've had, they had to face that. And now, I don't know, I just see all these little boys doing all their social media, way too much video game. Gaming has become so big now. I'm probably going to offend a lot of people out there. I don't get it, to each his own, but anyway, so I'm more down on males, I guess, overall. But
Is it the millennial male that you're down on, or?
And the Gen Z, or Zoomers.
Yeah, I guess it starts with the millennials.
Okay.
I guess to think of the chronology of it. But there's always been these kind of guys out there, though.
Sure.
Let me just say that. Yeah. They've always existed. All right, so I've dominated too much. Let's pass it around. And let's get the gal's perspective. I really want to know. I really want.
Well, I was thinking of, there was a podcast that I did watch by Warren Farrell, and he was talking about the crisis of male identity, which we were kind of touching on a little bit earlier. And I think especially with, we're talking about like rap culture or this millennial kind of perspective, it seems to be focusing a lot on this me, dominating, where you got to have the good job, you got to make the money, that's your focus, and when you have that, you have this power, and that power derives happiness somehow. And I think that is a big kind of thing, because he also talks about that, how that kind of comes into a disconnect from family. So men typically, I feel like nowadays, kind of come into two categories. You're either the heroes or you're the breadwinners. So the heroes are the ones that go out and fight, a lot of people that go into the military and things like that, or you stay home, or you have the domestic life and you have a job and then you become the breadwinner. Either one of those things kind of tend to focus on you personally and not so much on the family. Like, it kind of disconnects the male perspective from the family, from the child rearing, because you need to focus on your career. That's your focus. So I think kind of getting stuck in that me perspective, where you just kind of, you have to focus on that kind of success for yourself that will eventually become success for your family in the future, but it's still kind of creating that disconnect. If that makes any sense at all.
Well, it does and it doesn't. This is where I sort of, I also listened to the podcast by Warren Farrell, and I sort of disagree with him. I think he leaves the point unfinished, and very one-sided. I think that career and the financial support and the father that works has to balance the career and the competition that he is thrown into in the world, right, in order to provide for his family, with being there to help raise his kids. And I think that you can't, and I do think culture sort of tilts that way, but I think there's a very strong biological reason for that. And we can kind of get into some of that later. I think some of that actually goes back to Genesis, goes back to Adam and Eve. When God curses Eve with the burden of childbearing and the pains that go along with that, that is something that is unique to female physiology, right? Men will never be able to give birth to a child, right? So that is a unique feature to women, right? And so I think when he curses Adam to work the fields, and toil and everything, I think that is something that is biologically unique to men, okay? And I think some of what is going on in culture is we're trying to have the female do both things, and we're trying that experiment out, and I think what we're seeing, okay, especially on the masculine end of things, and how much men and male culture has changed for the worse, and some of this toxic masculinity could be part of that, is that experiment failed. And I think part of the curse of Adam from Genesis, and it's not that God actually cursed them, it's just this is something that's very rooted in biology, right? It's not that this is I'm not some Christian advocate or some sort of Christian
Hunter
or
Judeo.
No, I'm not pushing a Judeo-Christian agenda, but I think there was something very true in that, and that is the physiological burden of the man is to provide for the family while the mother is there to meet the physiological needs for the children. So, because a man can't nestle a baby at his bosom, right? He can't do that. He can't hold a baby in his womb for 9 months. So
in the argument,
what is he supposed to do in that time? How is he supposed to benefit the family with his time while the mother does that? Because there are things she can't do when she's in that sort of state, that nurturing, motherly, pregnant state. And I would argue it's almost a weaker state, right? It's harder to work when you're pregnant, right? I mean, do you have children?
No.
No. Well, so Sarah can attest to some of that,
to
some of this. It's harder to do things when you're pregnant.
Absolutely.
So that's where the male needs to pick up the burden. And I think this also falls back on what Jay was talking about, my father was talking about before, is that when you have the male out of the home, you don't have anyone to pick up that burden. So then in the absence of the father, you have the mother. All you have is the mother. And I'll dive into this a little bit deeper later on, but maybe dive into some of that experience of...
I have a perspective on that because I have raised my daughter basically by myself. And her dad is around, but he's kind of like a Sunday warrior kind of dad. Yeah. So my perspective is different. And it's very interesting because when you go into like the nurturing aspect of it, when I go and I work a 40-hour work week, I get home and I'm freaking exhausted. Like,
Yeah.
I do not have the energy to, like, give to my child that she deserves. And that's just kind of like the beast of the burden, you know? Or
Yeah.
is that how that phrase goes? We'll just go with it.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah. Oh,
Yeah. And it's interesting because I was working in a nursing home for about 3 years. I was doing therapy. So you're working in an environment where you're just drained. So you're giving everything emotionally and physically. You have to provide for your child. You have to pay for your house. You have to do grocery shopping. You have to clean. You have to cook. And then you have to, like, nurture your child. It's like, where do you find that energy? So coming from my perspective, like, yeah, it's a tough world living without, like, where you have the man that works and the mom that stays home.
Or even more so, to your point, you're able to split some of those responsibilities, the cooking, the cleaning, the
Sure.
playing with the kid.
Yeah.
Maybe you don't have all that energy as a single person, but between two people you might have enough energy together. Or
Yeah.
it would be a lot easier for you to have gone through those things with someone there by your side.
Yeah, oh yeah, absolutely. And I also have a few friends that just recently, I have 3 friends that had babies. And they're all in kind of similar situations. 2 of them are married, another one is with a long-term partner. And their biggest struggle right now is that he doesn't help. He doesn't do this. Yeah. And but this gets even better because one of my friends is very successful and she is a manager at a bank and she is definitely the breadwinner. And he was kind of like a stay-at-home son and she brought him in and she's like, "Here, I'll take care of you and you just work your little job and it'll all be fine." Because she made all the money, right? But now she has this baby. She's like, "Now I'm going to work and you're not doing this, you're not doing this, you're not doing this." And I'm like, oh, role reversals.
Ooh,
and it's
yeah,
messy.
yeah.
It's super messy.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
yeah, it's interesting.
And that's honestly one of the things I was thinking about is having like a stay-at-home father.
Yeah.
Because I had a stay-at-home dad. My dad, he was taken out of the workforce pretty early because of his disability. He had multiple sclerosis. So I had this awesome experience because every day I'd come home from school, there was a parent right there
Yeah.
making meals and everything. But the stay-at-home father, I mean, I guess I'm kind of curious how that falls into your argument with like biological roles, if that is how that would play into that.
Oh, I think some of the so I think how that might have helped you on an individual basis, maybe, and there might be a strong case for this, is I think having the opposite gendered parent around more might help you out. Simply because when you go out to school, you are more likely to associate yourself with the same gender. So if you don't pick up on the feminine, school will teach you kind of the feminine aspects of things, right? Sort of. So there's sort of that intricate, neat yin and yang. It's kind of like you want your parents to be enough of an example of what you're going to find out in the world. And what you're going to find out in the world are men and women, right? So you want to have those you want your mom and dad to kind of embody that. And they also almost poetically and metaphorically embody something like nature and nurture, right? And so the mother being the nature and the father being the nurture. And so because of that, it's important for you to have a strong relationship with the opposite sex parent in almost like a Freudian aspect, but even more so than that, because society will sort of give you the other side no matter what, as long as you're going to public education or something akin, because of the way humans sort of organize themselves in groups. You know, like when you see kids play, it's not that boys and girls don't play with each other ever, but more often than not, the boys will play together and the girls will play together. You know, it's just kind of how we organize ourselves in groups. And even when you let everyone do whatever they want, so when you have that free choice.
I guess I was more because we've talked about like what men and women kind of have as natural like strengths to them. Like women are more compassionate, men are more driven. But then when you've got the stay-at-home dad, they're kind of you're melding those roles together because now there has to be that compassion because they're the go-to. That's the person that you see. Yeah. And I guess I'm curious.
Well, I guess the question in that experiment is, was your mother completely out of the picture, or was she also in the picture?
No, she was in the picture.
Okay.
But she was the one that was working.
So you probably were given both role models properly, and maybe you definitely got them because your dad was around, as opposed to kind of the argument that you're making is that most fathers aren't in the home either because of single motherhood, or like what your point is, they're so driven in the work aspect that they are working not only 40-hour weeks, but 50, 60, 70 hours, whatever they can do to strive and become really, really good at something to then give back to the family. But they're coming home and they're, like Sarah was talking about, they're exhausted, right? They're exhausted after working. You're exhausted after working a 40-hour work week. I can't imagine working 50, 60 hours, something like that. And I think the current stats right now are women work an average of 35 hours a week and men work an average of 45 hours a week, something akin to that. So the average man is working over a 40-hour work week. How much energy does he have to then play with his kids, to wrestle around with his kids and to have fun and all that kind of stuff. And there's also these really archetypal things that are around the feminine and the masculine and how mothers and fathers differ in how they parent and why it's important to have both of them in the home. Again, kind of mirroring this nature-nurture aspect. You have the mother who provides physiologically nutrition, etc. But you also have, so the question, I guess, has always been, what does the father provide? And more recent psychological research has basically come to the conclusion that men offer, again, sort of that metaphorically nurture role, and they help you socialize, okay? They help teach children how to play a fair game. And so what do I mean by that? Well, women are more tuned to safety and enabling, and that's a part of the compassion, and agreeableness personality trait. So they measure, they don't really measure compassion, but what we can measure in personality traits and personality tests is agreeableness. And so you can either be more agreeable or less agreeable. Men are often more disagreeable, women are more agreeable, and that sort of leads to compassion, but other things as well. And one of the negatives of compassion is sort of the enabling. So that's sort of a negative trait of an archetypal mother. I'm kind of going off on a weird note here, but so women sort of put a small circle around their kid and go, you have to be in this circle because you're safe. You have to be within my eye, where I can see. You can't, go outside of this. They kind of wrap their children in this sort of like bubble wrap environment because they would rather the child be safe than to be at risk. But what do we know about learning? We know about learning and discovering anything is by going out reaching into the unknown. And so fathers are more likely to broaden that circle of what a child can do, right? And so, and that helps a kid socialize, right? That helps a kid socialize. Like, have you ever met somebody that's just like never gone anywhere, never done anything, it's kind of very sheltered? They're kind of socially awkward, they're very introverted. And they just don't meld well with the rest of society, and I think we're starting to see some of that in culture with people who have a hard time playing a fair game. So the father's role really is this, how to teach a kid how to play a fair game. So if your dad was there more often than most fathers, you probably got that aspect of life ingrained in you really, really well, so and that's good. That's really, really good. But I mean, there's things for your development that a father can't give you, like nutrition. And nutrition is like the key thing for like intelligence. And so if your mother's not around, you're kind of screwed. You're really screwed.
Are you talking infants or?
Yeah, infants.
Okay.
Infants.
Yeah.
They say the number one.
I was gonna say my dad cooked me vegetables all the time.
No, well, right.
That's a good dad. That's a good dad.
Yeah, they say one of the biggest things to human advancement in intellect and IQ and all kind of stuff is early childhood nutrition. And so the more I've looked into that, the more I've been kind of like, wow, that's kind of interesting.
Very interesting.
But yeah, no. And I guess the one more thing to add before I bounce it back to you guys is, so the father's role is that socialization, and a good way a good example of that would be when a kid is kind of learning to play. They're 2, 3, 4 years old, right? They're not in school yet. They're just learning to play. The father is going to be the one to more often than not do things like rough and tumble play. You see fathers wrestling around with their kids more than you see mothers, okay? Mothers are more likely to, when a child is kind of like learning how to play, they'll poke you in the eye and they'll stick their fingers in your mouth and they'll pull on your ear, right? A mother, being more compassionate and agreeable, is less likely to kind of tell them, no, you don't do that, and just kind of let them do that, right? Because they're safe. They're in that bubble. They're safe. Fathers are more likely to say, no, don't do that. You can't do that because that's not how you play a fair game, right? You can't go around poking people in the eye and sticking your fingers up their nose, all that kind of stuff. These are sort of the things that more often than not we learn from our fathers, whether we can grasp that or not. And so what you see with children who don't have fathers in the household is they don't learn how to play a fair game, and then they go into kindergarten, and then what do? They start poking kids in the eye and putting their fingers in their mouth and picking their nose, and the kids are like, what are you doing? You can't do that. And so they start to get ostracized by people, and that can lead to all kinds of issues with socialization that occur when the father's not in the household.
Well, that's a pretty bold statement. If a father's not in the household, the kid's gonna go to kindergarten and they're gonna poke kids.
More likely than not.
Okay.
Going back to was it Warren Farrell's thing? He talked about how children without fathers are more likely to end up in prison, more likely to end up being school shooters.
All right, but hold on. But let's jump into the extreme. Let Sarah get in here because she's a little bit ahead of where you're at right now, Zach. So
go for it.
She might have some words of wisdom.
Well, I just think it's just I understand that statistics show this, but I come from a different perspective because I'm a single parent, but my daughter also grew up around my dad for a lot of years. So she had my dad around, and she had her dad, and she had uncles. So I feel like saying, just because a child is in, a single mom household, that's just a small part of the picture. Because oftentimes there are males that step in, whether it be an uncle or a grandpa or a good friend or something.
Right.
Some sort of extra.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Absolutely, but I think this is also very, and maybe we will disagree on this. But I think there is no male figure in a child's life that will love them more than their biological father.
Sure.
And for those that are not, it's an incredible anomaly, and I feel very sorry for those people, for sure. And it's not to say that these sort of roles cannot be fulfilled by a grandfather or by an uncle or by a stepfather, right? But have you ever been a step person? You would love your biological kids more than you're going to love somebody else's
absolutely.
kids.
And I could never love someone else's kid as much as I love mine.
Well, right. So there is, as much as what you're saying is true, you can find that archetypal father through other means, and that's sort of what Warren Farrell was getting at, is that education needs to serve the purpose of being that father for these single mother households and for children without good father role models. So we need to have more male teachers to sort of
be those positive.
Well, right, kind of replace the family father with the environment or the societal father or something akin. And society's kind of failing in that regard.
Sure.
And so it is all very, very interesting, and I don't really know where I personally sit on some of that. I think that might be a short-term answer to a long-term problem. But
well, I think and the big thing too Warren was talking about was empowering men to take more roles in the care field. Because I was a CNA for 8 years. I can't even tell you how few men I got to work with on a regular basis, and there was a call for that. We'd have very specific men that I would work with would only be able to work with certain men that we were taking care of, and there was a definite need for that, a need in the education system. There's a very big deficit right now in male teachers, and
is there really?
That's what Warren was talking about. I was trying to fact check it, but I was having some issues finding good facts and figures on it. But you're losing those, having men, good male role models in more compassionate roles, and having that be kind of.
Well, and that's a society thing too, because a man's I'm not manly enough if I'm a teacher. That's not gonna fulfill.
Yeah, you don't say nurse, you say male nurse.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, he's a nurse. There's more of an attachment to that.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a stigma.
I want to jump in on that point because I definitely disagree, but I want Jay to jump in here and.
Well, it's very interesting listening to everybody, and I just want to say that first of all, I just want to do an overall thing. I'm a romantic. For those who are listening out there, I definitely believe in the masculine, the feminine, the yin and the yang. I believe that we need each other. We drive each other crazy. Sometimes we can torment each other, but we can also make each other feel wonderful in ways that nobody else can. So I'm a romantic on the issue, but it is difficult and it is hard. And I look back at people who mock the past, just like a complete Hollywood scumbag role. And by the way, if I say anything to offend any of you, I don't know any of you well enough, so it's nothing personal.
Okay?
So,
Way,
and again, just remember, I hate everybody.
Yeah.
So just everybody's listening out there. I'm against almost everything and everybody. Not really, but you'll see as we listen here. But Revolutionary Road, I mean, I just was like, what the hell is going on here? Leonardo DiCaprio and Kate got to get back together, I think. I don't know. I mean, to me, you look back and there was a whole thing, two things were happening at the same time. And I don't know when this all exactly was, late 60s, early 70s. There was this big pro-women's movement, but also they were starting to screw everybody over in the economy. In other words, they're telling women, oh, you want to work, burn your bras, you want to work, and you want to have a career. Then over here, the people behind the scenes, they're messing with the economy where you couldn't exactly have just one person providing the income. I think when you can have, and I gotta notice, do you sensitive snowflakes out there? I said when you can. Keyword is can, because that's very difficult nowadays. When you can have one person provide the income and have the children, especially I would say in those first 3 to 5 years, if you can have someone home alone, with them, that's wonderful. The people that can afford that. Yeah. Very few people can afford that. Okay, again, you were talking about your friend Sarah. Mm-hmm. I certainly hope the guy steps up here out of his little Peter Pan world and helps out more with the nurturing part of it. In life, we're all dealt different cards. You're dealt different situations. You talked about your father's health problems. And life isn't fair. And for my wife and I, we didn't have a lot of extra support. We had a little bit, not a whole lot. Some people get a lot. And by the way, if you're one of those people out there listening and you're a young mom and dad, and maybe you have your parents or your in-laws helping raise your kids, that's awesome. That's great. If it works out, everybody gets along, that's wonderful. Again, not everybody has it. So my wife and I, again, how do you do it? Well, for many years when our kids were little, we worked different shifts. Mm-hmm. So we didn't see each other as much, but one of us was always home with the kids. And so we didn't have to pay for daycare. Now, was it hard on our relationship? Sure, it was hard, but I think it was better for our children, and that's what we chose for our children to do that. And I think it was a good decision, and we haven't had that all through our entire marriage that way, but especially when the kids were young, we had a lot of that. And as a dad, and again, I'm not Mr. Lefty kind of guy, but I will say, when I do hear about men of yesteryear not helping out as much, not changing the diapers or not cooking the food, not helping with things, I'm like, whoa, wait a minute. This woman of yours, she carried this baby for 9 months and then she delivered it. Okay. Now, I just want to say, having been there for the birth of at least one of these people that are at this table with me right now.
At least. I knew you were at my birth, Dad.
That's the reason I called you Dad. I knew it.
I just want to tell you, I mean, there were moments there I was just like, oh, I'm so glad I'm a male. Oh, I'm so glad I'm a male. Oh my God. So for me, and when I hear of the guys in yesteryear, and this is the old cliche, guys years ago, I guess, I don't know, the 1960s or early 70s, they were out in a waiting room smoking inside a building, and they're not appreciating what their wife is going through, all this excruciating pain. It was, so this person who's at the table with me right now, he was a very long delivery. He was like about 36 hours.
Oh my gosh.
And so I had a whole new respect for my wife.
I didn't want to come out. I didn't want to come out.
For women in general.
It's like, no,
I can
So
still see images in my head right now. So I have profound respect for women. So it sounds like I'm kissing up to women. I totally am, but it's completely genuine. And so that alone, every man should be there with his wife as she gives birth. And it's a pretty amazing thing. It's a pretty amazing thing. And so women, to me, should be on a little bit on a pedestal, especially mothers, because that's it's a pretty amazing thing. And guys should be helping out. You're talking about the couple that I hope the gentleman steps up. And the thing is, nobody realizes how fast time is going.
Yeah.
And when they're little babies, and it's going real fast. And before you know it, they're going to be a toddler, and before you know it, they're going to be 4 and 5, and they're going to be going into school. And those are just really precious years when they're really cute. Mm-hmm. And then before you know it, they're teenagers and they're smarting off to you, and you're thinking, wow, whose idea was it to have all these kids? What the heck? Yeah, we got our friends who got a place up north and they don't have any kids. Gee, maybe they got it right. I don't know. Just kidding. I'm just kidding. Or am I? So, but yeah, no, I definitely. So there's different things with different generations, but first of all, I just want to say, if anybody can work it out, and if it's the woman who's the breadwinner, like you say, your friend is, and they can work it out. I know of a couple like that, as a matter of fact, and the dad is a very good nurturer, as far as I know, sure. And that's a wonderful thing. You talked about males being in teaching. I found that interesting. So that might be a whole nother topic for another day. I don't know, call it reverse sexism, but I think women are better teachers for the younger grades.
But they did, and specifically what Warren was talking about is that males will have statistically shown to do better in schooling if they have male teachers.
The male will.
The male
oh, interesting.
Because it's a different kind of connection with a male. Role.
Yeah, I was wondering what he was pointing to there. If it's that female teachers are sexist, or anti-male, what that meant, because he listed a statistic that said in reading, in reading grades, teachers were more likely, or I think you're saying female teachers are more likely to grade the male, mark them down if they knew they were male a third of the time. So over 30% of the time, female teachers would mark male grades down if they knew they were male, which is wild. And that's, again, kind of pointing to, like, sort of when we think of sexism, we usually think of male versus female, the male putting the female down. It's like, well, that's an indicator of the opposite happening. And kind of pointing to what you just said is like, well, they're going to do better if they have male teachers. And it's like, well, what are we, that kind of starts to go down a whole different route here. It's like, all right, well, are we saying that males should all be taught by men and females should be all taught by women? Well, that's a very binary, old school, kind of a private old school way of conducting things. But if the evidence is there for it, I think there's an interesting conversation to be had there. I don't know if I agree with it, but
I think there's a fair point to say there needs to be a healthy mix, because when we say like we're looking at like the male persona in today's day and age, if you are looking at a teacher, anyone, like let's say I had a really good friend that wanted to do work with preschool kids so bad. That was his passion, and he was like a kid magnet, really, really tall guy. But he was conflicted because he's like, what are the chances if I go in for an interview and I'm interviewing against you that I'm going to get the job? Sure. Because you're a woman. Yeah. We're expected to be more compassionate, better with kids, even though he had a very big disposition for that.
Yeah.
And I think that's more so the argument for that side, is saying that we are expecting women to fill these roles better than men. So they're going to be considered more highly over a man.
And well, right.
Sure, absolutely.
We are diving into something very interesting here, because I want to agree with you. Going back to before everything you got into there, Jay, we were talking about how men need to, like what you're talking about, men have to step up into these teacher roles and everything, and these compassionate roles. We've seen in the Scandinavian countries where things are the most egalitarian, meaning they are trying to equalize everything by the sexes, right? The highest differences in career choice by men and women. So everything you're saying as far as, if there's more male teachers, then, it's going to be better for the kids. And maybe there's a good argument there. Maybe they will be better for the kids. But what we're finding is the more you start to equalize things between the sexes in a society, like lawfully, right? The higher the male and female differences become. There's something
expand on that. Like where are they going?
There are
where
something
are
like
they going?
20-1 male engineers to female engineers in the Scandinavian countries. That is higher than the United States. That's higher than India. That's higher than most places around the
But
world.
wasn't it that way before?
Right?
Like 20 years ago, wasn't it that way? There?
It was the men to women was higher, but it wasn't that high. The differences increased. The more you made a country egalitarian, the differences between men and women increased. So it's like the more you try to squander the biological differences, it's kind of like we're repressing the biological differences, and I'll kind of dive into what that means or how we're doing that. The more you maximize the biological. And so by the law saying, well, we need to have more female engineers and we need to have more male teachers, what you have is, in the economy right now, we have equality of opportunity, okay? And you find that in most of the first world countries and free markets and all kind of stuff, or anybody that starts to take on aspects of the free market. And that means that you can go be whatever you want, right? If tomorrow you want to go to school and you want to be a male nurse, okay, you can go do that, You can go to school, we have equality of opportunity,
Yep.
right? But when men and women are allowed to choose what they want to do, their interests differ, okay? Men tend to be more interested in things, and women tend to be more interested in people. And this affects career choice. Because when you're dealing with when you're talking about engineers, you're talking about the 1 in 100 people that is interested in things, right? Engineers are not interested in people, they're interested in things.
Right.
When you're talking about teachers, right? You're talking about the 1 in 100 person that is highly interested in people, right? And not interested in things. They're not interested in how a car works. They're interested in the minds of children, right? And improving the minds of children, right? So it's a small difference. There's a lot more overlap between men and women than there are the differences. But at the ends of the distribution is where you see where these differences start to matter, and that's why we end up with more women nurses and more women child care providers and everything than males. So, and the more society tries to push that, the more these differences will grow, and that's what we've seen in all the Scandinavian countries, right? It's like over 50,000 surveys have been done, and it's very difficult to refute this evidence, and it flew in the face of all the psychologists that did it, because all psychologists are left leaning. All the psychologists are looking for what you're talking about. They want to see, oh, well, if we can teach men to be more compassionate and take on these teacher roles, then it's going to be, this is what's going to happen. And what they've done in the countries that they've made laws to sort of force that is that more men are less interested in that. They're more likely to go off and become engineers or bricklayers or something.
Because people don't want to be doing what they're told to be doing?
I think it's
do you
because
think
men,
that's where it boils to? Or
I think it's because men are more interested in things biologically,
Sure.
and women are more interested in people biologically, and you can't change that.
So then why did it make the gap more by them saying
Because you're repressing the biological interest of men and women.
But I guess, so what happens with the outliers, and where there are men that genuinely are more geared towards?
Equality of opportunity allows you to do whatever you want, so that
Yeah.
means that males who do want to go into nursing, they can. It's not saying equality of opportunity, and the biological differences aren't saying that 100% of nurses have to be female, or they are. Equality of opportunity is allowing anybody to do anything, and that's what we have, right? It's just that men were more likely, they were more interested in things and ideas than they are in people, right? And that's something that is just there is a positive correlation coefficient to that, right? And so a career choice is a large reflection of these things. So, the more you try to force, it's kind of like, we will get into the equality of opportunity versus the equality of outcome argument a lot, but when you're talking about, having a quota of, well, we need to have 20% of teachers be male, or 30%, or 40%, or 50%, right? It's like, well, where are we going to go with this, right? And when does it become you're taking away jobs from women who would find a more fulfilling life and career being teachers, then what else would they be doing? Where are we taking the men from to make them teachers, and where are you putting the females? Are you taking men who would be bricklayers and construction workers, okay, and tree trimmers and tree climbers and garbage men and plumbers and electricians? Are you making them teachers? And are you taking women who are less interested in any of those occupations and forcing them into those roles? Where does it go, and how far does it go, right? And it's not to say that overnight. I don't think Warren Farrell is asking for 50% of whatever. I don't think he's asking for equality of outcome to the T. But this becomes a little bit of a slippery slope, because I think allowing people to do what they want to do and have the freedom to choose the kind of career that they want to find fulfilling, is optimal to this whole idea of we have to have equality of, we have to have an equal amount of male and female teachers.
Well, let Ann get in here a little bit.
Well, I think and then that begs to question, what is this male kind of, holy brain fart, the stigma attached to it is like, well, I mean, there is a very heavy stigma attached to that. So I'm not saying that maybe we need to have a quota of people, but making it more socially acceptable for men to be taking on those roles if they so choose. Because you don't want to push, obviously. You don't push someone to do something that they don't want to do.
Yeah.
But because you're not going to be using their best attributes, their talents are not going to be used in the best way possible if you're forcing them to do something that's opposite to what their skill sets are.
Yeah.
But getting rid of that stigma and trying to say, like, well, that's perfectly fine if you want to, like, kind of get into these things, because, like, Sarah was talking about, like, the male nurse, that's kind of like a negative thing, like, well, why would you want to be a nurse? Like, that's not a guy's job.
Yeah.
So I think,
let's look at Meet the Parents. The guy, he's a male nurse, and he is ripped on
He's
the
a
whole
nurse.
time by, like, it's,
Oh God.
there's a stigma right there. The older generation looking down on a man for choosing a quote-unquote female job.
well, especially, like, in nursing homes, like, you have men that are, like, ooh, like, they don't want anything to do with the male caretakers, because when I've run into is, like, if you're a female, you can take care of men and females, but a lot of the times men will only prefer females.
Right.
But some of them do, but then there's still
And then
the people
females from that generation specifically, they're like, I don't want a man in here.
Nope.
Like,
Yeah,
my
yeah.
husband sees this, no one else sees this.
Yeah.
Female, yeah, come on in, honey. But a man, like, mm-mm.
They don't even walk
And
past
that
the door
makes
sometimes.
that makes sense to me. That makes sense.
Yeah.
and there is something where what you just described is, you just said older men prefer women and women prefer women. So
Correct.
there's also, not only is there more interest in taking care of people naturally by women, but there's also a bigger demand for women on both sides of that field. So there might not be any room for men or need for men in those fields.
I think
So
there's
even though- even
but I think
even
it's
though
a small category.
I think it might be a nice idea, but in practice, if no one wants a male nurse to clean them up and take care of them, well, then why are we forcing this, something we think is a good idea, when it put in practice, nobody wants it?
Yeah, but, like, so a male nurse, like, there is a spot for them. Like, for example, in the ICU. You'll see a lot of male nurses in the ICU because they're strong. You don't need that empathy, the compassion, as much as you would need if you're in a nursing home.
Them, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think there's a need for it, and I don't know. There's both sides to all stories,
Well, there's
but
also
in a
bonding.
nursing home, males, that's tough. That's a tough, like, role to fill.
But there's also, like, that aspect of, like, bonding, because a lot of the guys that I would work with, they'd be spending time a lot of the times with the men that were actually in the rooms, like, so they're providing
Sure.
that companionship, and they're still taking care. I mean, because there were also men that I said before, like, they would only prefer men to take care of them. Predominantly, females can fill both roles, and they do. But there's still an aspect. There's an argument to be made for that too. Is like, well, that bonding kind of experience that a man is going to get from another man, as opposed to a woman,
Sure.
Oh yeah.
and how that helps the healing process.
Oh yeah. Absolutely.
Well, we can stay with this, but of course, relationships would be much juicier, I think.
All right, let's go. Bring it on.
For the audience, I will just say, and this is just anecdotally, my son is quoting all kinds of stats and Scandinavian weirdos, and anyway, I'm just kidding. I'm just
The
kidding.
Democrats won't
I'm just,
Bernie won't like you
that's
saying
good.
that.
No, I know, especially for the lefties in the crowd, because they just love all the Scandinavian
I hope they're
countries.
still with us.
And
I hope they're still with us.
you hope there's did I drive them away? I probably did drive them away. Maybe like
Stay
a moth
with
to a
us.
flame. Maybe they'll love me, love to hate me. See, it works both ways.
You're gonna love us when we talk about war and foreign
yeah.
conflict.
Yes,
and
it's true.
Other things
true.
But that's for another day.
Yeah.
All right, relationships. Where are we going with relationships?
Pat Benatar said love is a battlefield.
Well, love is a battlefield.
Yeah, we're gonna get into that.
Let's pause here. We're gonna do a part 1 and a part 2. So if you want to hear the conversation keep going, join us for part 2. Thanks.